Okay. Hello, everyone. So this is the very first version of Dragonfly South Asia virtual meeting 2020. This is the first time we are trying out something that we actually didn't do for many years, but looks like a good opportunity to conduct a virtual meeting. This is going to be a feast of lectures for most of you. I know we have around 7,300 members on Dragonfly South Asia group, and we had hardly reached to 100 or 200 of you. So we thought that this is a good opportunity where we can share the knowledge, across web, and whoever is interested can watch these videos, ask questions in the form of comments, and maybe we will be able to answer it. So once again, welcome all. Let me share the screen so that everyone can see it here. This is Pankaj and that's Prasenjit. Our
Hello.
names are visible here. All right. So once again, welcome everyone. We are in the Dragonfly South Asia virtual meeting 2020. This is an event we have organized from 23rd April, that is today, till 2nd May 2020. And every day at 5:30 p.m. on our Dragonfly South Asia Facebook group, we will be live delivering lectures. And what lectures? So here are the number of lectures that we will be delivering. So we have shortlisted 10 topics. We thought that these are the main important topics that anyone can, get knowledge from. So the first topic today, that's Introduction to Ordinates, will be presented by me. So my name is Pankaj Kopade, and since Prosenjit is having some difficulty with his network, let me introduce myself. So today's topic is Know Your Dragonflies. This particular lecture is for people who are interested in dragonflies but don't know about dragonflies, or people who are taxonomists and just want to hang out and see what kind of information they can get. So my name is Pankaj Kopade, and I'm an ecologist. I primarily work on owls and dragonflies, and I head a lab called Chaturullu Lab. Here is my website link. You can go and check this link. My group has people of diverse interests such as biogeography, diversity and distribution, urban ecology, biodiversity informatics, and conservation outreach. Well, I'm also an admin for Dragonfly South Asia, Owl India, Roadkill Network, and Pune Bird Atlas. I'm also a Marathi writer. So here are some pictures of the species I work on, the landscapes that I've been working on, and this is, some members of my group. All right. So let's head to the main topic, today's topic. Dragonflies are everywhere. We have been noticing them in various art forms, in various cultures. In fact, MCU, the famous MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, has a character called Dragonfly, and that's how the Dragonfly appears. In fact, the Dragonfly I think first appeared in one of the movies of X-Men. So the MCU fan out there, you will know where the Dragonflies were. In fact, dragonflies are not only in a comic character, but they are also seen as accessories such as jewelry, prints on your T-shirts, print on your purses maybe, and in glass art, it's quite predominant. Sometimes also on your napkins, yeah, and in entertainment. So this is a shot from the famous Friends, and you know whose apartment this is. And those Friends fans out there, you know what mural I am pointing towards. This is the Dragonfly mural in Ross's apartment. So, in nutshell, dragonflies are everywhere around us in our art, and we see them, very prominently. So these are insects, and where did this insect come from? They have evolved over time, and this evolution, the time scale of evolution goes back around 325 million years ago. That's quite a lot of time. So we have evidences in terms of fossils, and this is one of the oldest fossil that has been recorded. And this one dragonfly, it's not a small, tiny rock. It's a huge, it's a huge rock, and what you can see is an imprint of a huge dragonfly called Meganeura. So they have actually gone through, various, impacts of climate change over the time, and that is what is very interesting about dragonflies. So dragonflies and damselflies together, we call them Odonata. So I'll come to that, what Odonata is. So let's look at the time scale. Here is a small interactive graph for all of you. On the x-axis, you can see time. So we are here. We are talking. We are delivering this virtual meeting at 0 point. We are here today. If you go back in time, that's how the time. That's how the categorization of the era will look like. So this is 200 million years ago. This is 400 million years ago, and so on. And on the y-axis, we have number of families. So how many families were existing at that time? Okay. So let's look at these arrows. You see that number of families were almost zero, nothing was there, and eventually it started rising up. It rose, and then again there was a drop. Again there was a rise, drop, rise, drop, rise, and so on. Okay, and we have come to this point where the number of families are quite a lot in number as such. But these arrows show an interesting pattern that over the time there has been many drops in the number of families, or in general many species died out. Okay, so these five arrows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these five arrows represent something called as mass extinction. It's a period, it's a very short time period in which a lot many families, lot many species die out. So that is what is called as mass extinction. So now I told you that odonates, they evolved around 325 million years ago. So on this time scale, you can see 300 is here, and 325 may be somewhere in the Carboniferous era, somewhere here, right? So now if you take from here, odonates might have come across 1, 2, 3 mass extinctions. Okay, and now we are at the 0 time point, and that is when we are experiencing the 6th mass extinction, and that's happening. We are in it. So what is so interesting about Odonata evolution? I told you about Meganeura, one of the biggest dragonfly that ever existed. So this is Meganeura. This is the size comparison of Meganeura, and these are today's modern dragonflies, which are tiny ones. We can even go and catch them. So there has been a tremendous amount of change in the size of dragonflies that has happened over the evolutionary time scale. Dragonflies have also survived 3 mass extinction till now, and we are into the 6th mass extinction, and they're there. So dragonflies are one of the oldest insect radiation that took flight, and they also include some of the largest insects that ever lived. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? So if you look at dragonfly evolution, and if you look at the oldest dragonflies that were Meganeura, so here is how, if you want to reconstruct the Meganeura, this is how it will look like. It's a huge insect, right? I mean, it can sit on your head and it can eat your brains. Well, I mean, I'm just saying, it may happen, right? It's a huge dragonfly. Well, imagine that you are in the Carboniferous era, around 325 million years ago. You are alive, you are in the Carboniferous era, and you are walking on the streets, no coronavirus, nothing. You're walking on the streets. Well, there are no streets, you're walking in the forest. The forest is something like this. In the slides, you can see how this forest look like. Huge dragonflies are roaming around, moving, they're flying around. So these insects, they may, they're like huge birds that, birds were not there at that time. So you can see that they're sort of huge birds that are flying around, huge insects. So after your walk, you go to your house, close your doors, and sit calmly. But hey, there's some knock on your door. You go to the door, open the door, and what you see is huge dragonfly coming inside your house and sitting on your hand. So this is how the Carboniferous era would have looked like if we were living at that time. Huge insects everywhere, huge dragonflies, Meganura. All right. So let's talk about today. Today we are in the sixth mass extinction. We are experiencing the sixth mass extinction. It is scientifically proven that what we are into is a sixth mass extinction. It's not a new thing. We are losing many animals. Here is an infographic. You can see that 13% of world's birds are threatened, 25% of mammals are threatened, 41% of amphibians are threatened. So many animals are threatened because of habitat loss, land use change, climate change, and so on. So there is a huge proportion of animals which are threatened. So let's have a more scientific inquiry in what exactly this is mass extinction and why we are talking about it. So have a look at this another graph. On the x-axis we have time scale again. So this is a relatively shorter time scale, 1500 to 2040, 2014. Okay, and on the y-axis we have cumulative extinction as percentage of IUCN evaluated species. So roughly you can call it as a extinction risk. So you can see that over the time there is a trend that all the type of animals, they have their extinction risks have increased quite a bit starting from 1500 to 2014. Now this is slightly older data, but it tells you what we are all looking at. Mammals and birds, well, they are at the most they are in the highest risk zone. Vertebrates and other invertebrates, they are slightly, if you combine them, they are slightly lower. So insects, nobody talks about insects. We talked about vertebrates, we talk about mammals and birds and amphibians, fishes, but we don't talk about insects. So what's happening with the insects? Well, insects, I mean, we always think that insects, there are so many of them, so they may not be threatened, but that may not be the case. So we'll talk about insects as we go ahead. When we talk about dragonflies, one thing that is very peculiar about dragonflies is that their colors. The colors are bright, they are of so much variety. There's variety in shape and sizes, and they're just beautiful. So there is, I mean, you cannot compare these insects with any other insects as such, because every insect has a different evolutionary trajectory it has gone through. But looking at dragonflies, there is something mystical about them, and there's something beautiful about them. So both the things combined is what I look at dragonfly. They are voracious predators. So unlike, I mean, they look beautiful, but the dragonflies are voracious predators. They feed on various type of insects. They are insectivores, and many times they can also take insects of their weight, or even sometimes whatever they can carry, whatever they can feed on, they feed on. So in the first photograph, we are looking at Ischnura species, Ischnura senegalensis. And in second and third photograph, we are looking at green marshhawk or Orthotrum sabina, which is a very talented predator as such. Dragonflies, they have a very unique flight, and here is a dragonfly to the left side and the damselfly to the right side. Very unique flight. So that reminds me that I have to show you a video, and I hope that in the live mode it works well. So let me switch the screens and show you the video. I hope you will be able to hear the voice. So just give me a minute.
We may think of lions and sharks among the most successful predators in nature, but lions and sharks catch about 50% of their prey at best. Dragonflies, on the other hand, catch up to
Pankaj, the video is not visible.
What enables them to do this?
Okay.
Scientists have found from recording signals in the brain that they can focus on one object at a time.
Is the video not visible?
Not yet.
All right. So
I
okay,
got the sound. The audio was there. The sound
Yeah.
was there, but video was not there.
shall I try again once again?
Please, please.
Let me. Oh, I think it's because of my mic is on. So
Okay, Pankaj, I think it's not working. So we can just go on with the
okay, fine. No
presentation.
problem. Yeah. So let me share the screen again. So now we know that the video doesn't work with StreamYard. All right. So I was talking about the flight in dragonflies. I mean, one of the ancient insects to take flight, and they have strong flight muscles. They can move forward and as well as reverse. That is something which is very interesting, very unique to a class of insects. And well, they have this, so they have this uh, very interesting vision. I mean, they have like multiple lenses in their compound eyes, around 18,000 lenses, 15 to 18,000 lenses in one single eye. So that makes up around 30,000 to 36,000 lenses, and plus three lenses in the middle part. So that's something really cool about them. So they are very visual insects as such. And some of the behavior that they show, such as territoriality. So here are damselflies were fighting for their land, for their territory. So their territories are quite small, like 50 centimeter or 20 centimeter of radius of the territory, but they can really fight, really hard for the territories. And when they fight, it looks to us like a dance, but they're actually doing it very aggressive. So that's something that is quite interesting about these insects. The migration in these insects is again a very famous or very interesting phenomena as such. So we have wandering glider, Pantala flavicense, which migrates from India to Africa, and this is one of the longest recorded insect migration. So that's quite interesting about this particular species. So we will be learning more about Pantala's migration in a behavioral talk. So I'm not going to steal the thunder this time. So you can see the route in this figure. From India, it goes to Africa and then comes back to India again. So that is really fantastic journey that it takes. And when these dragonflies migrate, well, they are migrating, over the seas, and they do everything in the air. When I say everything, it really means everything. So, what do they matter to us? What is so unique about dragonflies? So dragonflies are there in the art. They are iconic, charismatic insects, and many poets, naturalists, researchers, they have used them as an inspiration, noted them, have done a lot of research or observations on them. Uh, Looking from the ecosystem point of view, these are top predators in the insect world. So they help a lot in nutrient cycling. They help control insect populations. And for us, what matters is mosquitoes. So dragonflies also feed on mosquitoes. Here you can see in the third image that one dragonfly, this particular species is eating a mosquito. So as they eat mosquitoes, they are also sometimes called as pest controllers, and sometimes they are also eaten as delicacies in some parts of the world. So dragonflies, have become an integral part of the human societies. Well, dragonflies have drawn inspiration for developing machines like helicopters and windmills. Dragonfly wing is studied really well for understanding the aerodynamics of this tiny insect and how it moves. So it has given lot many insights about developing machines such as helicopter. Some new technology is on the way, and this is a patented technology called Dragonfly. Here they have used the dragonfly as sort of a tiny drone that can fly around and can capture videos or images of the areas it scans. So even the insects are used in developing certain technology. From again ecosystem point of view, as I said, that they are efficient insect predators, and they can really control the insect populations. One more aspect of dragonflies is that they sometimes act as a cool transporter for many small insects. So mites, many parasites, they can use dragonflies as their own private helicopter to move from one place to another. So I think in the insect world, that sounds really exciting. So coming back to the discussion of the sixth mass extinction. I told you earlier that we are living the sixth mass, we are in the sixth mass extinction, and the effects of it are quite visible. Recently, there was a study conducted in Germany in which the researchers collected data from various protected areas of insect abundance over a period of time, and they found that there is striking 75% decline in the insect abundance in the protected areas of Germany. And this is huge. 75% is really huge population decline. So the researchers went on to call it as ecological Armageddon, because insects are an integral part of any ecosystem. Many a times they are the primary consumers, which basically are some of the fundamental layers in a food pyramid or energy pyramid. So you might be experiencing similar thing. Maybe few years back, 10 years back, if you switch on a lamp, many insects will swarm to that lamp. But now, nothing. You don't see anything. If you go out, few years back, if you go out, take your jeep and go out, then many insects will simply die on the bonnet. But now nothing on the glass as well. So there is a decline which is visible, and that's why scientists are claiming that we are going to face ecological Armageddon. That is nothing but a subset of sixth mass extinction. So why are we seeing the decline in the insects? It has to do with their habitat, which they are losing, or the habitats which are degrading. So there are various factors that impact their habitats. First of all, dragonflies are freshwater insects. They are dependent on the freshwater for their reproduction. And we know what is the quality of freshwater in today's world. I mean, most of our freshwater resources are highly polluted because of several things, chemical pollution, pesticides, fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, industrial waste, sewage waste, and many other things that has a repercussion in the quality of the habitat and so on. So let's try to understand the dragonfly life cycle. So dragonflies are hemimetabolists in nature, and they are semi-aquatic. They live a semi-aquatic life cycle. So hemimetabolism meaning incomplete metamorphosis. So you can see that. Let's start from this tape here, where a dragonfly female is laying eggs. So she lays eggs, and then from egg a pro-larva develops, which becomes a larva, and then larva grows in size over the period of time, and it molds subsequently. And eventually the larva becomes so large that it gets the environmental clue, it comes out, climbs up on a stick, and then overnight it emerges out as a dragonfly with wings. And then the dragonfly follows or uses a aerial niche. It matures, it mates, and then the cycle completes. So this is very challenging life cycle, because half of the life cycle is underwater in the aquatic habitat, and almost half of the life cycle is above the water in the terrestrial and the aerial niche. So the larva, the insect which is underwater, had challenges which have to do with the aquatic niche. And when the adult comes out of the water, becomes a dragonfly, it faces challenges which are to do with the terrestrial and the aerial niche. So it's a very challenging sort of a life cycle that the dragonflies live. So that is again a very interesting part of their life cycle as such. Well, their mating is quite complicated, and you can see that all these are all damselflies. You can see that the way their mating position is. This is called a mating wheel, and odontologists call it as heart, because you can see an heart here. So in this diagram, in this figure, it is quite visible. So the upper one here is the male, wherever I'm pointing my cursor right now, and the lower one is the female. Okay. So this is a peculiar mating wheel position. So again, this is a behavioral aspect about which Neha will talk. So let's have a look at some of the dragonfly larvae or nymphs. This is a dragonfly larva, and the next one is a damselfly larva. So Prosenjit will be talking more about the larvae, so I'm not going to go in details right now. So you can see the difference, the dragonfly larva and the damselfly larva. So most of you are here today because you want to learn how to identify dragonflies and damselflies, or how to distinguish, at least to start with, between dragonflies and damselflies. So let me take you to that part of the lecture. So let's have a look at how many species and how to differentiate and so on. So dragonflies, as I mentioned in the when I started the lecture, that dragonflies are insects, and they belong to an order called Odonata. And as of now, there are 6,500 extant species. Extant meaning living species. Dragonflies or Odonata, odonates, have been divided into suborders. And the first suborder is called Anisoptera or dragonflies. The second is the Zygoptera or damselflies. And the third is Anisozygoptera or dragon damselflies. So the dragon damselflies are very few in number in the world. It's only 2 species. So most of our discussions will happen about the dragonflies and damselflies. So you can see here the dragonfly, the wings, the forewing and the hind wing, they are asymmetrical. They are not similar in size and shape. So that's why they are called Anisoptera. Ptera meaning wing, and anisos meaning they are not similar. Whereas in damselflies, their wings can be folded and they all sort of sit one on another. It means that the wings are, relatively similar in shape and size. So that's why they are called zygoptera. Zygos meaning similar and ptera meaning wings. And anisozygoptera show sort of mixed character of dragonflies and damselflies. That's why they are called as dragon damselflies. So here you can see that they can fold their wings, but their wings are relatively not similar. So most of the species, if you crack this down, around 3,000 and 3,000 species of dragonflies and damselflies that are existing, but there are up to 1,000 species which still await description. Still, we don't know. They are not known to science, so there is a lot of scope in terms of species discovery. And that's also because there are very few people who are working on ODONETs so far. Again, because the knowledge is not dissipated, or the taxonomy is sort of was so far not really well dealt with. But again, because of many platforms, many people, many photographs, now people are getting more and more interested, working on in the field of odontology. So you can refer this website, Web of Life, for the Dragonfly Odonata section. All right, let's come to the big question: how to distinguish between dragonfly and a damselfly. So the major differences are here listed here. So dragonflies, they generally sit with their wings open, and their bodies, they look very heavily built as compared to damselflies. Damselflies always sit with their wings folded, and their bodies are quite slender as compared to the dragonflies. The second main difference is the eyes. So here you can see that this is a compound eye, and you can actually see the lenses here in this. So there are thousands of lenses in both the eyes. So in case of dragonflies, the eyes are confluent, or the eyes are touching each other. And in case of damselflies, the eyes are separate, they are not touching each other. So these are the two major differences that you can use in the field to sort out dragonflies and damselflies. That is the first step that that is in the taxonomy. And as I said, that the dragon damselflies, there are only two species located in Himalayas. So don't really worry about them unless you go to Himalayas. So right now we are just dealing with dragonflies and damselflies. Okay. So this is going to be more interactive now, and I will need help from Prasenjit and Neha and maybe Dipti to read comments on Facebook. So I'm going to ask you questions whether this is a dragonfly and damselfly, and you have to answer it in the comments. And Prasenjit is here online, so he can give me feedback. So is this a dragonfly or a damselfly? What do you guys think?
Yeah, the answers are coming. Dragonfly.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Most people are telling dragonfly. Kaushik Ghosh, Mani Kumar, many people, all are telling dragonfly.
Okay, fine. Yeah, so this is a dragonfly, and this is one of the commonest dragonfly that you see around. It's a crimson marsh glider, Trithemis aurora. And the left one is the main.
David Raju is telling it's a dragonfly.
It's a dragonfly. Okay.
David is telling.
Sure. Okay. So we'll go ahead. So this is crimson marsh glider, Trithemis aurora. To the left you are seeing male, and to the right you are seeing female. Note down their color differences. Very different, right? One is a crimson colored and another one is a yellow colored species. Okay, moving forward. The next one, is it a dragonfly or a damselfly?
Again, people are telling dragonfly.
Okay.
And Pankaj, Samsi is asking that the eyes are not separated. So for the last slide, actually, they couldn't make out the eyes are separated or not. So can you please just
Okay.
tell them?
Shall I just go back? Okay, let me just go back. Let me just go back and show you the eyes. So in case of dragonflies, the eyes are confluent, they're touching each other. Okay, there's a lot of area where the two eyes are touching. But in case of damselflies, this is one eye and that's another eye. So there is a gap in the eyes. Okay. Also, you can see here, this is one eye and that's another eye. So there is a gap. There's a lot of gap in both the eyes. So eyes are separated. Okay. So even in case of dragonflies, eyes are separate. There are two compound eyes, but they're touching each other. Okay. In case of
And
damselflies,
some of the families may have eyes separated. So that is also a character.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move forward. So we are here, D Jewel, and most of you said that it's a dragonfly. So well done. This is a dragonfly indeed. And again, a very common dragonfly that you see around you. In its scientific name, it's called Brachythemis contaminata. And the contaminata signifies that it is found in polluted waters. So you can actually see the infected mites infection here, black colored ones on the male dragonfly, the tail of the abdomen of the male dragonfly. Again, you can note down their colors. Their colors are very different. The male is orangish, saffron colored, and the female is sort of a dull golden colored. Their wing spots are different in color. So there is quite a lot of differences even in the male and female. So moving forward, next slide. Is it a dragonfly or a damselfly? Yeah.
All are telling damselfly. Everyone is telling damselfly.
Everyone is telling damselflies. I think because they attended my previous lecture somewhere, so that's why they are saying it. Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's a damselfly. It's a special case of special family of damselflies, which Lestidae family, which keeps its wings open when they sit, and that's why they're also called as spread wing. So I think people used two clues. One is their wings, and the second is their position of the eyes. So in the second picture, you can definitely see that the eyes are separate. Okay. So this particular example was given to confuse you, but it looks like that most of our audience is it's clever. So or they might have attended some lecture somewhere. Okay. So I'm moving forward. Is it a dragonfly or a damselfly?
Okay, damselfly. Answer is coming, damselfly.
Yeah, that's correct. The differences are quite visible here. The wings are in folded position. The eyes are not actually visible, but in this the second picture, you can see that the eyes are separate. So here I wanted to highlight one point. So this is Senegal golden dartlet, Ischnura senegalensis, one of the commonest species of of our areas. And you can see that I had shown you earlier in a mating reel position. The upper one is a male, so this is the male, and the lower one is the female. The regular female or the normally colored female of the species looks like something like this. There's a variation in the coloration that's called a heterochromatic female or a saffron reddish colored female, something like this. And there is one more variation that is called andromorphic female, which looks something like this, which look exactly like a male. Okay, so this is for one single species you have 3 different morphs of the female. So why does that happen? That we will cover in the behavior lecture. So stay tuned for the behavior lecture. So this is something to think about. So before the behavior lecture, maybe if you have answers, you can share on the Facebook comments, and then we will take it from there. So the next slide again, saffron-faced blue dart, Pseudagrion rubriceps. Is it a dragonfly or a damselfly?
Yeah, a lot of answers are coming as damselfly.
Okay. Yeah, that's correct. This is a damselfly, a very classic example of a damselfly. You can see the folded wings, the eyes are not touching each other, they are separate. So this picture, I just wanted to show you that there is something called a mate guarding behavior in damselflies. So here you can see that this is a male and that's the female, and female is ovipositing. She is laying eggs underwater in an aquatic vegetation, and she is holding on to that aquatic plant, and then she is boring holes and laying eggs in it, and the male is still holding her by her thorax. So the male does not want the female to lose the female. So this is called a mate guarding behavior, very unique behavior shown by many damselflies, about which Neha again will be talking in the behavior lecture. So moving on to the next slide. Some of the slides are obviously stolen from Parag's lecture, so he will revisit some of these slides. So do you think that both these are same species or they are different?
So people are telling that no, they are not same species, and they are different species. Two answers have come, they are different species, and one answer has come, yes, they are same species but male and female.
Okay.
So I think you can just
go
on. Yes.
Yeah. So so I'll go by majority that they are two different species, but are they really two different species? So as I showed you a few other earlier slides in which I showed you the male and female look very different in coloration. So even one single species, the male and female may look very, very different. Okay. So it means that just understanding the differences between dragonflies and damselflies is not enough. You have to also understand the gender differences, the sex differences, the male and female differences. Okay. So there are some tests which you can use in the field to identify a male and female. So this definitely is a same species, male and female. The upper one is the male and the lower one is the female. You can see the shape of the structure of the abdominal end. Okay, the females abdominal ends look swollen, and the males look very tapering or sort of sharp. So this is the main difference between the female and male's anal appendages. So the female's anal appendages look bulged or look swollen because of ovipositor, and the male's anal appendages, they look sharp because there is absence of ovipositor. So what is ovipositor and how it functions? Again, we will discuss that in the behavior lecture. What about these two species? Are they male and female, or they are two different species? All right. So these are again a male and female pair. It's the same species. They belong to the same species, Pied skimmer or Neurothemis tulia. The right one is the male and the left one is the female. Now you can see that both of them are colorful, but the male has more pigmentation than the female, and they look very different in general as such. So there is a variation within male and female, so that also you have to be a little bit careful about. So in the coming two lectures about the adult and larval taxonomy, you will get to learn more about dragonflies. So how to identify a male versus female? So first identification criteria was the shape of anal appendages or the presence and absence of ovipositor. And the second confirmatory test is the secondary genitalia. So the secondary genitalia is generally present in the second segment of the abdomen. The abdomen has 10 segments. Out of the 10 segments, this is the second segment. On the second segment, there is some sort of protrusion in case of males. So that is the secondary genitalia. In case of females, that protrusion is not there. The secondary genitalia is absent. So it means that the male has the primary and secondary genitalia, and during mating, the male transfer sperm from the primary genitalia to the secondary genitalia, and that is the reason behind the mating wheel formation. Okay, so the sperms are located here, and from here they are transferred to the ovary of the female. All right. So we are at the end of our lecture. There are quite many resources available online. For the newcomers, there are these amazing books, 2 field guides, Dragonflies and Damselflies of Peninsular India by Dr. K. A. Subramanian, and Dragonflies and Damselflies of Orissa and Eastern India by Dr. Manoj Nair. So both these books are really fantastic and very informative. If you are tech savvy, then please go and visit this website called Odonet of India. It is a very well moderated website which contains a lot of information on dragonflies and damselflies of India with pictures and their distribution maps. And you can also contribute your photographs to this website. So there is plenty of information available already if you want to be an odonatologist. So what is the status of Indian odonatology? Well, as I mentioned that we have some very awesome field guides, awesome resources which are created for field identification of dragonflies. But we have a legacy of natural history material. We have very old taxonomic and natural history material available with us in the form of Fauna of British India, Odonata Volume 1, 2, and 3, written by F.C. Fraser during 1933 to 1936. And they contain a lot of information on about 400 species found in India. So we have 500 species in India right now, but there is quite a lot of material already available and detailed material available on dragonflies of India. So that is some excellent taxonomic material that is available with us. What we lack is the research on ecology and evolution of these insects. So most of the research is concentrated on the taxonomy part of it, or natural history observations. There is very little research that has been conducted on the ecology of dragonflies or evolution of dragonflies, especially from India. We are not really thinking about odonata conservation and outreach yet. So we do not have that capacity yet. We are not really looking at, in general, we are not really considering insects apart from butterflies as something that we need to conserve, because maybe because they don't look good, or maybe because they are useless. That's what we think. And lastly, right now through Dragonfly South Asia, we are creating good network of researchers, young and old alike. But again, somewhere we still lack that networking that has to happen among the researchers, so that the knowledge or the information can be exchanged or can be accessed very easily. So we are Dragonfly South Asia, and we are an informal group, and we have on this Facebook group we have around 7,327 members. But we started as a Yahoo group. It was a very slow mailing group at that time. It was established in 2005. And Dragonfly India, Dragonfly South Asia is a part of Diversity India. We started as a Dragonfly India group, and eventually, we got many people from across South Asia. So we renamed ourselves as Dragonfly South Asia. South Asian Council of Odontology is a collaborator with us. For these particular sessions on the virtual meeting, we have Society for Odonate Study as well as a partner. So our Yahoo group has around 400 plus members. Our FB group has around 7,300 members. We also have an India Biodiversity portal group called Dragonflies of India, which has 500 plus members. And people are contributing their data to Analyst as well as Odonate of India website. So I am hoping that more and more people join in this movement. It's an informal network of people, researchers. If you become a part of this, it's a good opportunity for networking. Information can flow very fast, and we also help amateurs to learn, like through these kind of lectures and so on. Every year we conduct a meeting called Dragonfly South Asia meeting. This we have been doing since 2014, and this again a very small group that generally comes 20 to 30 people. We take them to the field. We teach them taxonomy. We do hands-on taxonomy sessions with them, and we do a lot many discussions. It's generally, the Dragonfly South Asia meetings are really quite a happening place. So through the Dragonfly South Asia network, a lot of research has come out, a lot many publications through our group, through the people who are attached to this group. So these are the people who are publishing. They are the sort of frontiers of Indian odontology, and that's really a proud thing for all of us. So our iNaturalist observation coverage is quite big. This is not only about dragonflies, but in general the Diversity India. So there are many data points from where people are contributing data. So as we deposit more and more data on iNaturalist, and as more and more of it becomes research grade, it is going to be really wonderful for all of us to see that we started this small group, but now it has grown so big, and people are contributing actively to conservation of insects. So odonata conservation is about large-scale conservation of freshwater habitats, because freshwater is a very crucial habitat for dragonflies in general. In cities, urban green spaces and the freshwater areas, they play a really important role for dragonflies to survive. Typically Japanese style urban gardens are really important, because these kind of gardens, they incorporate stream as well as lake kind of habitat, which is again very helpful for odonates to breed. Our primary streams in the mountainous areas is where most of our endemics are located. Endemics from the Western Ghats and Northeast, they are located mostly in the primary streams and mountainous areas, and these are also the habitat components which needs saving. And of course, land use change is one of the major contributor that can completely wipe out populations or completely change the species composition. And this we are actually seeing in some of our recent research, which I'll be presenting when I'll be talking about the sampling and survey lecture. So these are the key points, which can promote Odonata conservation. So finally, let me end with this slide where I typically show a dragonfly and a cat. Both are very talented and efficient predators, one on the land and one in the air. And appreciation is what is must when they come face to face each other. So thank you all for patient listening. I can take some questions now. So let me show my face again. And I request Prasenjit also to join me. Yeah. So we have, yeah.
Pankaj, I have noted
So
down the
many
question.
questions are flowing in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have noted down some questions from the beginning. And the first question by Saran Venkatesh. He was asking how many generations
Okay.
of Pantala
Okay.
generally
So I
migrate.
raise some.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you repeat
So,
that? I lost you. How many generations does it take to do a complete migration for Pantala? Is that the question?
Yes.
Well, I mean, it's not a single generation for sure. There are multiple generations which are migrating, and many of the individuals die, and they keep on breeding, and when they start their journey again back from Africa to India, it's sort of a cycle. It's a what do you say? It's a continuous process. So many generations may be migrating together. It's not a single
there
generation
is a
that
study.
goes from India to Africa.
Yeah, there is a study that shows all total nearly 16 different generations were spotted in a single migrating group of Pantala. So
Okay.
that is a reference, but I don't think more study are there.
Okay.
Some more questions like Anuradha Singhamapatra is asking all Odonata, do they complete their life cycles in water or not? So Pankaj, may I answer this question?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Okay, so there are some Odonata that is completely aquatic. Most Odonates are actually completely aquatic in their larval life, but there are some Odonata that are semi-aquatic or even terrestrial also, like semi-terrestrial, not completely terrestrial, but they can during their life, during their larval stage, they can stay in wet moss and mud and like only just out of water, but some moist area. And some larvae are there. Some are larvae are recorded from different water sources like Phytotelmata. That is, if there is some water in tree holes, even they can breed in that tree hole also. So there are different species and they are different niche choice, but mostly they are aquatic. Okay, next question is average lifespan of a dragonfly by Milan Arayal. Average lifespan
Well, I
of a
mean,
dragonfly, but in adult, not the larval stage.
not the larval stages. So it keeps on varying depending upon the environmental conditions, but average you can take as 1 year. And in case of larval, lifespan, again there are records that some larvae have emerged after the 8 years of time in water. So again, that varies a lot depending upon the environmental conditions.
And
Yeah.
it's depends on the species also. So all species, they generally larger species, they live for longer time, and smaller species have smaller lifespan. Okay, next question is
Yeah.
longest recorded migration for damselflies by Milan Ariel again. So
Yeah.
I think
So I think
we will discuss this during the behavior workshop. Neha will be
okay.
telling about this. So we will take this question down. So we
Yeah.
will discuss this later. There are a small record of migration in damselflies also, but not very long. Like local migrations are recorded, and
Mhm.
that we will discuss in the migration. Sorry, behavioral part.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. I think it's already answered. Shravan Venkatesh is asking that Anisozygoptera, there is a dragon damselflies, where we can find it. So Pankaj already told that we can find it in the Himalayas. So only one species is recorded from Indian Himalaya, Nepal, Darjeeling Himalaya, that is
Mhm.
Epiophilia ledloi, and some other species are known from China, the Chinese part of Himalaya, and Nepal also. So,
Yeah. So I have a
and
suggestion. I have suggestion for Sharan. Sharan, please
okay,
don't go to Himalayas right now. We are under lockdown. So please be at home, stay home, stay safe, and keep the dragonflies safe as well. Just kidding. Okay, don't take it. Never mind.
okay. Next question is by Swati. Swati is asking. It's a long question. The gist of is if there is any relation between mangrove ecosystem with the dragonfly. So she is actually working in Sundarbans. So she
Oh, okay.
wanted to know. She has seen many dragonflies and damselflies in the mangroves. So she wanted to know if they have any relation with the mangroves or not. So again, Pankaj, I am taking this question.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
so actually, only one species is known to breed in mangrove ecosystem, that is the saltwater. But India doesn't have that species. So in Indian Sundarbans or in Indian any mangrove ecosystem, we see many insects, we see many dragonflies, but they don't breed there. At least they don't breed in the salt water, they breed only in fresh water, and there will be definitely some freshwater pools inside the forest, the rainwater reserve. So generally they prefer to breed in those pools, and they here comes the question of migration. Small small species also, they can migrate. They can actually be driven by the breeze to the farthest corners of Sundarbans, and sometimes they just venture those forests for food, for predation, prey. So that's why we see those species. They don't breed that in that habitat. Achha,
Yeah.
next question is actually many people have asked this question: what is andromorph? So you already told, and maybe you
Mhm.
just tell few lines more.
Okay. So andromorphism is a phenomena which is quite commonly seen in many insects, where a female looks similar to the male morph. So for instance, it could be in the color or the structure. Okay. And there are many hypotheses and theories about why this phenomena takes place. Because generally, in case of dragonflies and damselflies, males are brightly colored and females are drab colored. So being brightly colored can also increase your chances of getting predated by your predators like birds and other predators. But looking like a male, being a female looking like a male, can also decrease your chances of getting harassed for sexual, copulation. So males typically, I mean, there is this hypothesis which is called a negative frequency dependent selection. So in a population when there are very few females and there are many number of males, males tend to grab as many females as they can every time for copulation because they want to increase their reproductive fitness. But in this situation the females will be the losers because every time they copulate they are actually getting exhausted, they're losing a lot many energy, and they may not even find time or energy to feed, and that's why they may simply starve and die. So they either prefer to be away from the male owned territories, or they look similar to the males, so that male get confused and they don't go to those females which look like males and grab them. So basically these are sort of sexual selection strategies in which this color keeps on changing. So many people are working, and maybe we'll hear more about it in the behavior lecture.
Okay, thank you, Pankaj. Ananna Chakrabarti asked that if all the species males are always brightly colored.
Well, I mean, it's our perception. I mean, we look at them as brightly colored, but perhaps for them, some other clues are there. Maybe for instance, just like with the honeybee and the flower. I mean, flower looks colorful to us because we see in that particular visible spectra, and there are colors. But actually, for honeybees, the clues are in the form of infrared, colors. So honeybees can actually see the infrared, not the visible spectra. So it's again about perception. For me, most of the males are colorful, brightly colored, as compared to the females of dragonflies and damselflies.
Okay, so next question is, okay, this is a very interesting question. I don't know the answer actually. Kaushik Ghosh is asking why eye color of different dragonflies is different in the upper part and the lower part. Like eye is differently colored in upper half and lower half. So it's very difficult to say why. I don't know. Maybe in
I mean, I can also, I can't tell you the perhaps the right exact answer, but here are some speculations.
We can find out and get back in the later lectures.
Yeah, definitely. It could be because of the density of the lenses, or some other phenomena. I don't really know.
Mm-hmm. And Sagayaraj is asking why insects are he sees more insects during the rain. He is from Tamil Nadu. Why in monsoon or rainy season he is seeing most insects? So it's actually very easy that monsoon season generally supports more number of vegetation and more new leaves. So as most insects are dependent on plants, so the number of insects goes up with the rain. And as dragonflies also, they depend on smaller insects. They feed on smaller insects, so their number also goes up with the available food. So it's the cycle of life. So as monsoon supports most insects to complete their breeding season, that's why. And obviously aquatic insects, they have like additional breeding grounds in monsoon pools or rainwater fed pools. So that's make the number of insects more during monsoon. Okay, one more question. Suraya Khan is asking, what is the function of pterostigma? So I see that Balachandran sir already answered. So maybe we will add some more. The Balachandran sir already answered that it helps in balancing, and it reduces the vibration in the wing. So maybe we'll get back to the same answer in the behavior part or something, because I don't have the exact reference now. So pterostigma actually it helps in flight and balancing, and there are evolutionary ways. Yes, tell.
Yeah. So just one addition that I mean, what Bala sir has been saying, that's completely right. So balancing and also adding some weight on the wings so that vibrations are taken care of. Similar system is in our aeroplanes. In our aeroplanes, the fuel is stored in the wings, not in the the central body. So that again helps in the balance, and as well as absorbs vibrations.
Nice. Okay, so and some people are asking if we are going to upload this video in YouTube or not. So that we will think again, think about it.
Yeah.
And some more questions are there.
These videos are available on Facebook, so you can watch the video. You can, even after we log off now, even after we end the broadcast, it will be available. So you can scroll back. If you have missed some part, you can scroll back and go back and see from where So it will not be permanently on Facebook, but for a few days it will be there. So don't worry. So it will be there. So perhaps we can end today's session here. So I mean, it's a really nice response from all of you. We are really glad that all of you joined and
And
watched of
Pankaj,
it.
just one
Yeah.
thing. There are some more questions left, so we will
Okay.
answer those questions now or in later because they mostly belong to the behavioral part.
So perhaps you can take them during the behavior session.
Yeah, yeah, that I'll prefer.
Okay, so I think I have got some three questions which I can quickly go through.
Yeah.
So this is by Soham Bhattacharya. It seems the naming of the species is mostly been done by the morphology of the dragonfly, though the females look very different. Is there any specific reason? So the answer is the most of the taxonomy of dragonflies is male based. Okay, so it's because they have certain shapes and sizes, shapes which are very useful in conducting the taxonomy. And you will find that at wetlands mostly you see the males because females tend to keep away from the male dominant territories. So most of our naming, and again males are brightly colored and it's very easy to name them depending upon their colors. So most of our naming taxonomy, the scientific names as well as the common names are primarily driven by the male phenotype. The second question is by Preeti Vijay. Seems the dragonfly which migrates between India and Africa, the generations which migrates out may be different from that migrates back. So I think we have already answered this question, but you can again ask the same question in Neha's lecture. Soham has one more question. Where do the dragonflies take shelter? And is there a time of day when they show highest activity? Well, dragonflies are like other insects are cold-blooded animals and they require sun's energy to heat their bodies up. So whenever it is sunny, they will be most active. So typically in the morning times, like 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. is the peak activity of theirs. And as the temperature or the sun goes down, they will become less active. Many a times they roost together. You will find them roosting in groups, and that gives them additional security towards any predator around. So yeah, I mean their activity period differs. Prasenjit, any other questions are there, or
Yes,
maybe
only two questions are there. I can see. What are the wings made of?
okay.
Suraya Khan is asking.
So what is it? It's chitin, right?
Chitin, yes.
It's made up of chitin, and there are venations on the wing. Do you want to take this?
Actually, yeah, sure. So it's the same chemical component that is the outer structure of the insect body is made of. That is the chitinous, and it depends on the concentration or deposition of the chitin, that how hard and or how soft the part will be. So when the wings are stretching during the like early stage of life, when the adult emerges from its larval stage, that time it generally remains folded. The wings remains folded in a very small pad. So then the during the emergence, the adult, it pumps the fluid, the hemolymph, through the small veins of the wing, and that actually helps the wing to stretch. So as the wings become stretched and it becomes dried gradually within few hours, and then it becomes very hard. So that's why the concentration of the whatever you see the veins, that is actually the connection of the that flow of the hemolymph, and in between, that is called cell, that is a very thin membrane that is also made up of chitin, but the concentration and deposition is different.
Yeah.
And one more question is there, how many eggs they lay at once? That I think we can keep for the behavior part. And can you say something about the
I think Prasenjit, you are there is lag or something. I think I'm not able to hear you. Has gone. I think he's frozen. I can see his frozen face. I don't know what to do now. My moderator is gone. Okay. So I think it's good time that we stop. Thank you all for participating. And I think we have lost Prasenjit, but I hope he will be there in the coming few sessions. So thank you all again for being here. And we will continue doing this every day at 5:30 p.m. on Dragonfly South Asia Facebook group. There will be a new lecture every day. So today's was a very basic introduction lecture. And those of you who haven't really, who didn't know about Dragonflies, now you know about Dragonflies. So that's really great. I got some comments that this was a nice session and many of you are getting benefited. So thanks a lot again for being here, for being a part of Dragonfly South Asia. And we will take your leave tomorrow, same time, 5:30 p.m. We will be live again with Prasenjit and Parag, and we will be talking about Odonata taxonomy, adult Odonata taxonomy. So those of you who want to learn about how to identify dragonflies based on the hardcore, the scientific method of taxonomy, then please be here again. And I will take your leave now. So enjoy your evening and bye bye.